Many thanks, Ferdinand. He was able to capture a few of those high points of security issues till this moment. Let's bring in our panel of experienced security experts. I have the defense and security expert, Dr. Kabir Adamu, who is also the Chief Executive Officer of security firm Beacon Consulting, and also the international security analyst who is a certified anti-terrorism specialist and is the African representative of the Global Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board, David Otto. Gentlemen, good to see you both and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We're back again. It's very important that we go back and have a review. But again, that's Ferdinand, who's our security and defense correspondent, giving his collation of what has happened so far. Let's start by with you, David. For you, before we dig in deep and start to expand the conversation, 100 days for the Tinubu administration, security-wise, what are the high points for you?
Well, I think, for me, it's a matter of, where we are at the moment. We know that the president promised a renewed hope, a new doctrine, a new architecture. But of course, from a security point of view, you understand that there are, comprehensive strategies that, are required in terms of the operational tactics, the tactical operations, but also the capabilities of the various security agencies. And I think what the president has been able to do at this point in time is to have the various chiefs of staff, the defense chiefs, are in place. That, of course, is your foundation because you need leadership from that security architecture in order for you to achieve your objectives and your mission. What we've also seen is that he now has the ministers in place who would, complement some of the work that the general security chiefs, are expected to do. Nigeria has a plethora of security threats, and these are not the sort of threats that could be resolved within 100 days. But what I think people want to see at this point in time, which of course we can see some what I call tire marks, of that, is the setting up of the leadership. The leadership is expected to drive, the new doctrine that the president spoke about. They're expected to drive the new architecture. So that is there. But in terms of, the continuity of threats and hostilities that we've seen in areas like Plateau, Sokoto, Zamfara, and just recently at the FCT, where there was some recent kidnapping in some local government areas within Abuja. Those will not, be extinguished just by, a president's policy. You still have those threats happening. We know that the FCT minister, has spoken about what needs to be done to deal with some of those threats. But generally, I believe that the internal threats that Nigeria faces within the 6 geopolitical zones, the president has had its leaders set up, put in place in terms to deal with that. Externally, we still have threats that we're still experiencing in terms of the impact of the coup. But generally, what I believe is that the nature of the economy, with the hike in fuel prices, we're still recovering from the Naira policies that Nigeria has faced. So hopefully we would see some progress, but 100 days is too early to determine how well he's going to do. Security would always be a threat, but what we want to see is what kind of strategies and how comprehensive are those strategies that he's put in place. Still too early to tell.
Okay, let me bring in Kabir Adamu. Too early to tell, 100 days, but again, for journalists and key watchers and even the opposition, everyone is watching and trying to gauge that renewed hope agenda, which security is very, tightly tied to some of the successes of the program of the president.
No, definitely. During the campaign, and in fact, the first steps the president took was around security. Apart from meeting with the then, security management officials that he had, You recall he also visited the office of the National Security Advisor, the new complex, indicating that, just like he has said in his manifesto, the renewed hope, which I'm going to talk about shortly, just to buttress the point that David has made regarding strategy. He visited that office and talked about collaboration, talked about the plethora of threat elements that David mentioned. So much has happened within those 100 days that for a careful listener and observer would indicate the direction that the new administration are likely to follow. I mentioned the renewed hope, in that, which is the document that was shared by the Bola Ahmed and Shetima campaign group during the campaigns. Now there, they mentioned a 7-point agenda, and I'll quickly go through them. It talks about bolstering our security forces, both in terms of number and capabilities. It talks about redefined military doctrine and practice. Very important. It was the realization that perhaps the military doctrine and practice was not in tandem with the realities of the security threats that Nigeria was facing. So they indicated that they're going to review that. Then they also talked about securing critical national infrastructure. First off, what is our critical national infrastructure? Then what plan are they going to put in place to protect that critical national infrastructure? As an example, if we agree oil, the last part of the report talked about oil theft. If it's the critical national infrastructure, how are they going to protect it? So they talked about that in that place. And then peaceful communities, secure borders, saved forests. I have been in your platform severally, and this is one thing that I've consistently spoken about. The fact that we've got forest reserves that are currently dominated by non-state armed groups. And the administration mentioned that it would put in place a policy, strategies to protect those ungoverned spaces that we, as we refer to them. Then integrated identity database, absolutely important. We've got multitude of databases, and frankly, that are useless to us. And in fact, are even vulnerabilities that are being abused by different elements. And they have the ambition to harmonize that database. And then they talked about international collaboration. In other words, the realization that we can't do it alone. We need to partner with other foreign countries and be able to do it. And he's in India, and I think he's been able to secure, I'm not sure of the amount, but some billions of dollars to be invested in DICON, so that Nigeria can, I think in a space of 4 years, be able to produce 40% of our weapons, both ammunition and weaponry requirement. Quite ambitious, Suleiman. And then lastly, reposition the police, which is, for me, absolutely important. A realization that the police is the lead agency for internal security. Now, all these are statements. How will those statements be turned into implementable instruments? And that is what David referred to as strategy. He's talked about the appointment of security management leadership, the cabinet ministers, and a few other appointments that we're waiting for. So we're hoping that in the coming days, I agree with him, 100 days is too early, that we would see policy documents that would show clearly to Nigerians how they intend to achieve this 7-point agenda. Also, very importantly, out of this, they've talked about food security. There is also climate security. All of this is contained in that Renewed Hope document. And we're watching closely to see what statement would come out of the government in terms of policy initiatives that would help achieve. I agree totally that everything mentioned here is absolutely important, plus the food security and climate security element of it. We'll wait to see at what point they announce the policy direction, and of course how they intend to go about it. Outside of this, there are two critical elements. It's not been mentioned, but I'm hoping that sometime within the administration of the government, they realize the need. Security sector governance. We've got multitude of security elements. playing around. But how do they tie together to achieve Section 14, subsection 2 of the Constitution? That is security sector governance. Then security sector reform. We're currently afraid, as it were, of the domino effect of the coups that are happening around West Africa. The only thing that would prevent that from happening in Nigeria is a full-fledged security sector reform. Perhaps in the course of the conversation we can talk about some of this.
Yeah, and again, pretty much later we'll talk about the coups. And I'll come back to you later on so that we can expatiate on the two critical elements you say are absent. And a quick one here before I come to David. Speaking of which, the G20, which the president is attending in India, you spoke about his agreement with some company in India about Daikon. Specifically, it's a new $1 billion agreement to bring the Defense Industries Corporation of Nigeria to 40% self-sufficiency in local manufacturing and production of defense equipment in country, at least by the year 2027 through a comprehensive partnership and managing arm. And I also want us to expand on that and see what kind of good that will mean for Nigeria and its West African neighbors. David, we come to you now. Leadership is one of the key things you spoke about. You said the security chiefs are already in place, and they've also been able to gather some gains apart from the setback and challenges we've seen, which has also caused some kind of discomfort in the hearts of many Nigerians. Speak to us on some of the key things that are already work in progress, that you and your team see as work in progress within the administration's security architecture.
Well, I think what we've seen so far is more or less a continuation of what the previous chiefs have done. But of course, what Nigerians are expected to see in practice is to have that level of coordination. The president spoke about the fact that he wants to see the military and other sister agencies working together and coordinating in terms of how they deal with the national threats. I think what is more important at this point in time is to be able to see how the military chiefs establish a plan of action, and that may include identifying the existing threats that Nigeria faces in each and every one of the 6 geopolitical zones, but also try and localize that within the 36 states and of course the FCT. So once we can have that level of detailed planning, it's more or less easier for them to be able to approach the insecurity that we're facing. So I think leadership brings that into the fore, and of course one of the key elements that we've always talked about is how does the leadership at this point in time include other agencies that are not security agencies. So for example, the population, because today's threats is the type of threat where you need to ensure that you bring in the population as well. The population plays a critical role in identifying some of these threats. I mean, I attended one of the sessions where the IGP spoke about the need for Nigeria to incorporate private security organizations as part of the population-driven strategy, and I hope that we would also see that. Another thing which I think the leadership should be looking towards is bringing in technology-based driven security. Of course, we still have to rely on human intelligence and the role that humans play. But I think in the 21st century, we still have to be much more focused on technological-based security, talking about issues of cybercrime. So the leadership has to establish a plan, and security works. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. We want to see what kind of plan has been established and see how that plan can be used to coordinate other sister agencies. And then, of course, you can develop and come up with your national intelligence estimate, which, of course, will tell you where the resources are required. Dr. Kebi mentioned about the fact that you need to know where you lack your resources, and you need to know which areas you prioritize in terms of national security. You need to know which areas you do not prioritize. So it's a comprehensive package. And with the new leaders in place, what we want to see and what Nigerians want to see is that kind of leadership that can establish that it has a plan and works with that plan to achieve some level of security.
Dr. Adamu, quickly here, what kind of optics should a Nigerian see that will give you the sense of winning, that the country truly is being secure? And I'll put that in, I want you to also put that in perspective to the two critical elements, which one is security sector reforms.
What the average Nigerian wants is protection. It's as simple as that. The average Nigerian, especially those that are living in the villages that are currently being ravaged by non-state armed groups who appear to have the capacity to wield their influence, at will, as it were. The average Nigerian wants to be protected. He or she wants to be able to go to his farm and farm without the activities of this group preventing him. He or she wants to travel from point A to point B without the fear of these groups affecting him, and that's all over the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. So in terms of optics, as soon as the government is able to prevent these non-state armed groups from moving around and wielding this type of unfortunate influence on vulnerable populations, then I think that for me would be optic number 1. Optic number 2, the perception, and it's unfortunately quite huge, that there is corruption within the security system. If the government is able to move forward, and I'm quite happy to note that as part of its priority areas, it has indicated that it would tackle corruption. Not too long ago, the president held a meeting with, I can't remember the name of the international organization, but he talked about data, how he's going to impute data into the governance system. Now, all of those will be elements on how he can reduce corruption. The earlier he's able to move that, then I think that those are the kind of optics that Nigerians can relate to. Number 3 is this monster, quote unquote, that Nigerian leaders in the past have been unable to address, this issue of police personnel working with VIPs. If you recall, when the acting Inspector General of Police was appointed, he attempted to withdraw them, and it became a little bit embarrassing. Now, we're hoping that in the coming days, the president will step in and ensure that that happens. Those kind of optics would be, Nigerians can relate to it, and they would feel very, happy about. And then, of course, more importantly, a security sector that is able to work together. The president has spoken about collaboration, and that brings me to the security sector governance issue. He's talked about collaboration. There are about 29 ministries, departments, and agencies involved in security. And at the moment, most of them are operating in silos. If you recall, yesterday, there was an embarrassing development here in Abuja. Apparently, a woman who had some issues with a tailor invited one of the security departments, an operative from that department. He went into the market and used his gun. And before you know it, another organization that was deployed in that market stepped in. And they were contrasting reports by the two organizations, publicly released report, clearly showing that there was no coordination between the two of them. So the president has given a presidential directive that he wants to see collaboration. We're hoping that the persons around the president, and specifically the chief of staff to the president, the secretary to the government of the federation, will pick that presidential directive where he instructed collaboration, and I'll add the other 2 C's, cooperation and coordination. Pick that statement, turn it into an administrative instrument, and then come up with a strategy on how to achieve the 3 C's, collaboration, coordination, and cooperation. Those are optics that would allow Nigerians to tie into it. And more importantly, in the Renewed Hope document, and as part of the government's priority areas, I think about 7 of them, where they talked about security and then several other things as well, economy and then food security. Winning the hearts and minds of Nigerians features strongly there. So all of these things that I've mentioned, I don't think there is any other area, perhaps apart from economy, that this administration can win the hearts of minds of Nigeria if they are able to make progress in security. The moment they make progress in security, they would have won the hearts and minds of Nigerians. So it's a win-win, a low-hanging fruit, as it were, for them to just pluck, and before you know it, Nigerians can key in. The other point, which I think is absolutely important, is strategic communication. Currently, I am seeing very little of that. Strategic communication that is able to gauge what comes out and the responses of that. If you're coming out with a policy, whether it's in economy, in politics, in whatever, there is a security component to that policy. How do you gauge the consequence, the effect of that policy? How do you tie that policy into your overall objectives as a government? So I think it's absolutely important to have a strategic communication component as part of the government plan. So all of these things, if you ask me, as part of security sector governance, and then more importantly, as part of the government's desire to win the hearts and minds of the people, are low-hanging fruits that can be plucked, and the government will benefit from it. And then in conclusion, the president went to Kaduna. I think it was Jaji, the military school there, and he talked about harnessing our national powers. I think it's about time that we ask ourselves, what are the elements of our national powers? Which ones are weak and which ones are strong? And then hopefully, as part of these low-hanging fruits, focus on the ones that are strong, look at the ones that are weak. National cohesion as an example. There's this amazing institution, I love referring to them, African Polling Institute. Every year they release a report on national cohesion. And consistently they've been scoring us above the global standard, I think below 50. Consistently we've been scoring about 40. Now and in that report they identify the elements why our national cohesion is that low. Now at what point are we going to look at that and start addressing it? National powers is about those national elements. Yeah. If they are in the current circumstances they are in, then believe me, there is no way we are going to address it. So all these things are things that I'm hoping. And if you notice, in all of this, I've not talked about kinetic power. Yeah. Because current security is really about the soft components. Addressing them would give you an improved national security. And
truly, and that's why the strategic communication component is very key here. Let's bring you, David, again. Let's speak more about winning the hearts and minds of the people and link that to private security getting into the fray and see how they can help with what we're dealing with at the moment.
Yes, of course, you know, the overall idea of national security is that you want to make sure that the citizens do buy into the security architecture and the strategy that the government has put in place. But more importantly, as Dr. Kibi said, the citizens want to be safe. People want to travel safely. People want to make sure that their properties and their assets, you know, are being looked after. And that's why you have you know, the 4 Ps. You know, we talk about the issues of protection, prevention, and pursue, and also issues of preparation. You know, how much preparatory strategy does the government have in place? You know, in ensuring that if, for example, there is an incident, they are prepared to respond to that. This is where citizens are given more trust, you know, in terms of how the government's strategy works. You talk about issues of prevention, how much preventative measures are being implemented, you know, by the government. I know that the Nigerian government is collaborating with the UK government on promoting, you know, preventive strategies against serious organized crime and terrorism. That is still under the Office of the National Security Advisor. So we're hoping that, you know, he would take that, you know, from the previous NSA and then continue with it at this point in time, because, you know, preventive measures, you know, are quite key in terms of how you know, the government reduces the vulnerabilities of the community. People want to see that, you know, besides catching the bad guys or throwing bombs, you know, the government is also implementing strategies to prevent people from joining by providing them with alternative means of livelihood. Now, in the current economy, as we know, you know, it's not the best. You know, the issues, again, we mentioned earlier on, of the hike in fuel prices and all that. So that is another area I think the government has to work on and look into those preventative measures. My colleague spoke about protecting critical infrastructure. You know, of course, if you want to attract businesses from outside and from within. The president, has been to attending the G20. People who want to invest in the country want to ensure that their infrastructures, can be protected. So I think it's quite important to harness all these strategies in place and come up with a comprehensive plan. And if you do that, once the citizens trust that the government can protect them, that unsigned social contract that exists between the government and the people, whereby the government provides basic security for the people, I think it would go a long way. There is no level of development that you can achieve when there is insecurity. We've seen how insecurity has been used as a justification for the overthrow of constitutional government. So these are very critical issues, and we want to see that the government is working day in, day out to ensure that it meets with the promises that it made. This is now the governing phase. It's no longer the campaign phase. So the government has to prove that whatever it said during the campaign, it is meeting that in practice.
Well, I'm happy. I'm excited that you've actually touched on, pointed to the direction where we'll be speaking on when we come back, the people and some of the key things that will make anyone look towards self-help, as we've seen in other parts of the world. You're watching Arise Prime Time. The conversation continues. When we return, we'll be taking a look at regional security issues and again, oil theft, how it affects what Nigeria is dealing with at the moment. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day with me, Sulaiman Leda, and I still have with me here Dr. Kabir Adamu and David Otto. We're talking about President Tinubu's first 100 days in office, and tonight our focus is on security. Now, let's expand the conversation and look at the external threats facing Nigeria. The issues of coups that have been rocking Africa is another point the Nigerian government needs to pay attention to, and that's why David actually pointed to that. Let's start with you, Kabir. And but before we dig into the coup, I spoke about oil theft. The president is in India, and you would have noticed that as against the norm, asking for loans, the president is looking towards partnerships, and that's why we spoke about Daikon earlier on. But one critical thing here is to service those debts, you also must do some plugins, and oil theft is also tied to security, to even the acquisition of small and light arms, because these are illicit funds coming to the people, to some of these people. How can Nigeria also work in that direction to the extent that that is dealt with legally and quickly too?
I'm embarrassed sitting here as a Nigerian, and we're discussing oil theft in 2023. Despite the level of awareness that the matter has gotten, and in spite of the fact that it's bleeding the economy. As far as I know, we've not been able to meet the OPEC quota consistently. So clearly, it's the hemorrhaging situation. And who is benefiting from that hemorrhage? It's the thieves that are working with locals to, as it were, circumvent the oil and use it for other nefarious activities that they do. Oil is not something that you can hide in your pocket. So again, I'm embarrassed. Like so many things in Nigeria, we make this look like rocket science. It's not rocket science. Earlier on, I spoke about 27 MDAs. A significant number of them are involved in maritime security. A significant portion of that oil that is being stolen is stolen through maritime borders. And so, Suleiman, is as simple as ensuring that responsibility, those who have responsibility take responsibility. It's as simple as that. From the NNPC down to the law enforcement agencies, and even more importantly, the communities where all of this, oil, as it were, belong. If I start reeling out the several attempted measures, and I'm using my word consciously now, attempted, it's attempted because we're still dealing with the phenomenon. We've invested huge sums of money to prevent it. Even as we're talking today, the House of Reps has a sitting committee. You just need, as a journalist, you need to find out how much the House of Reps is spending on that committee's work. Now, if you go back to the 8th Assembly, to the 9th Assembly, and probably assemblies before that, and try to get the sum of money that has been invested in addressing that phenomenon, then come to the executive arm of government and then try to collate the money that has been spent in trying to address that issue. That's why I started by saying I'm embarrassed. And the solution is simple. We need to take responsibility for our action. We should stop this. I mean, we talk about cabals.
Yeah.
You talk, when it comes to subsidy, it's a cabal. When it comes to oil theft, talk about the unnamed quote unquote cabal. Till date, nobody has had the courage to, not even to mention them, but to arrest them and prosecute them. So again, I'm concluding with my statement. I'm embarrassed. The day we're serious as a country, we can start addressing that issue. Nobody should hold us to ransom. If this is an asset that is vital to our survival, then we should treat it as such. It's as simple as that. If I had any presidential authority, it is to call the agencies that have responsibility, that we have mandated constitutional responsibility for the protection of our oil assets, and give them a month to stop this phenomenon. And if they're not able to, I take action against their leadership. It's as simple as that.
And David, you want to add to that before we jump into the coups, in neighboring countries?
Well, I think, Dr. Kibi has said it all. When it comes to protection of critical infrastructure, you need to see a plan. Nigeria is not the kind of country, and, in the time frame that we're talking about, the 21st century, whereby you would see oil being stolen at the level at which it is being stolen. It's simply linked to the kind of corruption that we shouldn't be having in this point in time, and rightly so. It's down to the leadership. The president has appointed the heads of national security, and I think there is a need for them to come up with a strategy. And as Dr. Kibi said, it should be there should be a time frame given to them to ensure that within this time frame, we can have a reversal of the level of oil theft that is being experienced, but not just oil theft, other threats that the country is experiencing. For such a giant that Nigeria is,
I think I need to jump in here for such a giant. And I recall Kabir had said about 29 agencies, around security. Is it too much of a task for the country to protect or manage its oil and other critical infrastructure? Because we see that has been given to individuals to the extent that 29 plus some individuals and counting, still we've not been able to get this sorted.
It's all about commitment. It's not about the number of agencies that you have. You have 29 security agencies, but each and every one of those agencies has areas of responsibility. I think we should be looking at, the Navy, for example, as a key agency in terms of protecting the oil facilities and protecting our waters. But we have seen that over the years there has always been leakages, and I think this is where the leadership of the government should stress and ensure that there is a plan. I mean, it's all about your strategic planning. It's not just giving them the go ahead to deal with, but you've got to be able to demand for a plan, and then of course from that you can then tell what level of capacity that is required, how deep is the threat, and how long it will take for you to deal with that threat. But it's down to the plan. You fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Now let's jump in and see if we can close on this. Just recently, Kabir, I met two young lad, and I spoke to them. Why are you not in school? Here in Abuja, And they said they've never been to schools, that the only place they've been to is the Madrasatu Arabiya. And I said, where are you from? And they go, Niger. So it tells you why some people are a little bit apprehensive and worried about what's happening in Niger. They say Niger is Nigeria, it's not a Niger, another Nigeria is Niger. So help us understand the kind of threat, if any, that Nigeria may be experiencing with the latest development in Niger.
Thank you, Suleiman. We are short of time. I would have loved to have speak about this as extensively as possible. There are external threats to Nigeria. Niger is one of them, but there is a bigger one, which is Mali. And sadly, Sudan. The developments in Sudan and in Mali are likely to pose bigger threats to Nigeria than Niger, that we are not even focusing on at the moment. With regards to Niger, a population of 25 million people that has had a history of civil war, internal civil war, that has one of the largest border points in the Sahel region, and that is coterminous to Nigeria. And in simple terms, if you have an enemy that wants to fight you, and you both have a common enemy that you have been trying to stop, and then all of a sudden your enemy is threatening to attack you, what you would do simply is to allow that other common enemy to start attacking this other enemy, so that the enemy would be busy protecting itself than to fight you. I wouldn't say more than this, but that's the kind of threat that we're likely to encounter if the situation in Niger deteriorates. The second element is the possibility of a geopolitical war, for lack of a better word, occurring in Niger. Niger has strategic interest for several countries, global powers, and they are currently focused and concentrated on Niger. Now, if that kind of geopolitical war breaks out in Niger, the impact will be felt in those 7 states that are coterminous to Niger, and of course, to a larger extent, other parts of Nigeria. Our borders are porous. You would see a flow of everything from weapons to any other thing you can mention into Nigeria. So we need to take the issue in Niger more seriously, and like I mentioned, in Mali as well as Sudan. An AK-47 that used to sell for probably around maybe $75 before the war in Sudan is currently going for maybe probably less than $10 at the moment. And where is it going to end? End in Nigeria. So we need to wake up from this slumber. Our intelligence, our foreign service capabilities, they've been in a slumber. They need to wake up.
So how true, before I come to David, quickly so that we can close with David, how true is it that that threat could also affect the nation's capital, Abuja?
Well, definitely. I'm in a public space, and so I'm mindful what I say. Yeah. But what capabilities do we have for preventing drone attacks at the moment? You need to ask yourself. I'll leave it at that.
So, David, Niger, Nigeria, and some political and economic issues tied to what we're dealing with.
Well, I think, as Dr. Kibi said, we're dealing with a time bomb depending on how we manage the situation. Of course, we have condemned the coup in Niger, but one thing which we've made very clear is that any measure that would escalate the situation will be catastrophic to not just Nigeria, but the region at large. Niger shares a massive border, as my colleague mentioned, and we have commonalities. But of course, Niger is Niger, Nigeria is Nigeria from a sovereignty point of view. But considering the geopolitical positioning of these two countries, I don't think by any means should Nigeria look towards any steps that would further escalate the situation. We know that Nigeria now currently holds the chairmanship of ECOWAS. They may have pressures in terms of ushering in a military intervention due to maybe the support network from European states that ECOWAS might have. But I think for the interest of Nigeria and the interest of the region, we should be very, very careful how we deal with the situation. Dr. Kibi mentioned the impact that could come from Sudan, Mali. We're still experiencing the impact from Libya. And there is no regional interest. We've seen countries like Algeria that have made it very clear that we should pursue dialogue and negotiations. But I think what is more important is that within Nigeria and within the ECOWAS region of West Africa, there should be a standby force activated to intervene in any event of, maybe a coup going on. But that window passed in the case of Niger. We need to support a transitional government, not carry out any measure that would be catastrophic. Nigeria is moving on. I think the president has a green light to move on with governance, and I think corruption and issues of injustice. These are some of the key components that lead to insecurity, and I think those issues need to be dealt with. Thank you.
It's a fine place for us to leave it, corruption and issues of injustice, and we would like to thank you, David Otto and Dr. Kabir Adamu. Many thanks for your time.